Alright, so that song was Bad Bad News by Leon Bridges. So the guitarist that played that solo in the recording, I think his name's like Nate Mercereau. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but anyway, pretty sick solo. It's actually one of my favourites, I think. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the rhythm in his melodies. So he uses a lot of syncopation, which also contributes to the funk blues kind of style that he goes for. The first half of the solo, he uses more broken up sort of riffs using different phrasing to keep the listener engaged. But as the solo goes on, he has these longer riffs that sort of stretch for longer periods, and they kind of have a more consistent sort of shuffle sound. It's sort of chugging along like a train during those parts, and it kind of breaks up the randomness of the phrasing and gets you more into the flow of the solo. With the first part of the solo, it's more just and then it's like, so it's like, it's like kind of a lot of different like syncopated rhythms, and then the first sort of longer riff he does, that's more of that shuffle I was talking about, so it's like that kind of idea. So there's also this idea where he repeats a phrasing pattern immediately after he does it. So like, for example, when he goes, it's like kind of like, he actually repeats that a number of times, but in other parts as well, he's like, he like repeats it twice just to make sure you really get the idea of what he's trying to communicate. Yeah, so that's kind of like repeating that shuffle he did earlier. Yeah, so that's the idea with that. So now I'm going to talk about the notes and the melodic theory about what's going on. So he uses the blues scale a lot, but he also combines this with like using a lot of enclosures and chromaticism for like a more jazzy sort of sound. It's a style of improv I really like, by the way, and that's why it's one of my favourite solos. So there's a target note he uses twice at the start of the solo, which is the D note. So we're in the key of like F sort of minor pentatonic, or F blues scale, or F natural minor, whichever one you want to think it sort of in terms of. And so he hits that D note, which kind of makes it more of a Dorian sort of scale. So he goes a step up and then back down to kind of emphasize that sort of sound, that Dorian sound. And then he'll also finish on that note there before going back to the blues sound. So he's really trying to emphasize that Dorian sound at the start, which I think it's like a nice trick, and it kind of makes it sound a little more jazzy, because like the Dorian scale is something that's used a lot in jazz. If you want to think of the song in the key of the relative major, so we're in the F minor, A flat major. If you want to think of it in terms of that scale, then that Dorian note is actually the tritone of that major scale. So it kind of it creates a lot of tension, that note, but I think it also sounds kind of beautiful in the right context. Especially when you get the solo back on track to the more conventional notes right after that. Yeah, so the first longer riff, it starts off very jazzy, using chromaticism a lot. But brought home with the Tasty Blues riff, which is a motif that's used later on in the other longer riff that occurs. And having that sort of repetition helps the solo build a narrative. He'll throw in a couple of triads after that, which kind of breaks up the melody and just adds a little contrast. This next part of the solo, it's very heavy in the use of chromaticism and enclosures, and it teases the right and wrong sort of notes. I say wrong, but there's no wrong notes, but you kind of get what I mean, the kind of dissonant sort of notes. So it'd be like, so you know what I mean. So he's teasing towards getting towards the right note, but he will do it in a roundabout way where you go, well, that sounds wrong. And then we're back on track again and lands on the chord tone. So, and then here again, does the same, it's the same sort of idea. And then we go into the next longer riff, which is kind of like, I explained earlier, it's like sort of like some weird like jazz techniques used, but then slides into a more bluesy kind of thing. You'll then hit like 2-note chords that are kind of like fourths stacked on each other. Those like things that are used in blues, but he'll also throw in a couple of like Hendrix sort of flourishes, like the classic, like that sort of minor third interval, that kind of sound. We'll do that, reinforcing that whole blues sort of thing. There's a tritone that's emphasized next, and yeah, it throws the listener off balance. Then there's like a sort of return to the blues again, where it's like hitting that note there, which is like the natural third of the scale, which turns the minor pentatonic into a major pentatonic, which is a trick that a lot of blues guitarists sort of use, where it goes that rhythmic sort of motif repeated again, and then it just finishes off kind of just like the syncopated rhythm. So yeah, and that's just how it sort of finishes up. And before I move on, I just want to shout out 2 sort of earlier riffs that are used in the song. They utilize sort of similar themes to what's used in the solo. So the first one was where he goes, and he's hitting that note there, which is kind of like turning the minor pentatonic into a major pentatonic again. And then back to the right notes basically. And then he's emphasizing that tritone sound again as well. And so the other riff is just where he goes, which is just a nice little sweep sort of sound, sweep picking sort of thing. And ends the note on the second of the tonic, which is just like an interesting note to finish up on. I'm just going to quickly talk about a few sort of musicology ideas. So not too many dynamics highlighted in the solo. The tone's kind of warm and soft sounding, which creates a chill sort of atmosphere. The whole sort of, the range of the pitch is kind of like mostly in this sort of area up to here. So it's like pretty medium, nothing changes too much, except it kind of does go a bit higher when it's like, but then it kind of returns back to like kind of a deeper sort of pitch, which is kind of creates more of a storyline sort of for the solo, and just a lot of contrast and repetition used with the sort of rhythmic and melodic ideas he has. So the tempo is fairly upbeat, which keeps the song feeling like it's driving forward. And the guitar volume, it's kind of understated, but it still cuts through pretty well, which is perfect for the vibe of the song. So the kind of emotion and the narrative that he's going for, the voice of the solo, I guess you could call it, is like, I think it has a bit of attitude to it. So it's like, it's got attitude like a bluesy sort of like very in your face sort of style, but it also like is kind of spicy because it'll have like these jazz chromaticism and enclosures that are used very often, which I think it just adds that you don't know what's going to happen next kind of feeling. I think that's basically it. Hey, I wrote a lot of notes for that one, so hopefully the video isn't too annoying to watch, I guess. But yeah, that's it. So thanks for watching.